all, and welcome to another episode of Thinking Historically About. In this episode, we're going to be thinking historically about the farm workers movement, about Cesar Chavez, and about the Delano Grape Strike. And I'm very excited as my guest today to have Dr. Lloyd Barba, who is an assistant professor of religion at Amherst College. Dr. Barba, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Really excited to talk about this.
This is something that you kind of live and breathe in your scholarship and your professional life. And I'd love for you to help us understand why. What's your personal context? What drew you to this particular area and era of study?
Uh, uh, lots, lots actually. To really get down to the soil of it, growing up in Stockton, California. So not just in Stockton. I'm in Stockton primarily from Stockton. Spent most of my years there, but also a little place outside of Stockton called Lathrop. And growing up there, ag is all around you. I mean, you drive out 5, if that, miles or so, and you're in the thick of orchards before you know it. You drive out a little bit further, and then there's beet farms. Not quite the Shroot beet farms that you may know from The Office, right? A much different sort. But it's the name Cesar Chavez really is a household name out there, and not in the way that I, as a historian, would like it would be a household name. It's more sort of folks have a passing knowledge of Chavez. So even for myself, I mean, I grew up, as mentioned, the Lathrop Stockton area, knew about Cesar Chavez at a very superficial level. I think part of it had to do with the fact that, grew up parents from Mexico. My dad worked in construction. My mom worked at Heinz 57 Ketchup and at Del Monte. So chances right, a lot of the canned fruits from Del Monte. And maybe that has something to do with it. But also, once I got to Stockton, my family moved there when I was a teenager. Cesar Chavez High School was not even a mile away. I was technically district to go somewhere else. You see it. It's a very prominent name. And at best, folks might know, oh, he helped many of the farm workers for their rights. Very basic like that. Without really knowing, like, okay, what rights or what's the historical time frame? That is largely absent unless there's a unit where we're actually talking about that. And this is one of the things where it feels very micro in local history, but it really shouldn't be. This is national history, right? That we should have across various textbooks. I like to refer to Chavez as Latino history's beloved son, and a lot of it has to do with the fact, again, that he is helping out folks in the field in this particular time, which I'm happy to get to in earnest a bit more. But being from Stockton, it often happens to many of us. We go away for college. In my case, I went to college locally at the University of the Pacific. Even then, didn't pick up much on Cesar Chavez. It wasn't until I went away for grad school, a couple thousand miles away to Ann Arbor, Michigan, at the University of Michigan, that it took a keen interest. I don't know, maybe I was homesick. Maybe that's part of it, right? We try to figure out things about yourself and your identity. And I was in the course about the politics of race in the post World War II era, and we were looking at numerous social activists and organizers and such who charted the way forward for civil rights. And we had some material, but not a lot on Cesar Chavez. And I was in a graduate program in American Studies, but my concentration was very much American religious history. And I did a couple of initial readings on Cesar Chavez by folks like the now departed Luis Leon, some other work by the scholars of religion and historians, Gaston Espinosa, and my own mentor at Michigan, Daniel Ramirez. And it was very obvious there's a lot more to this Cesar Chavez story than just the farm work alone. Um, Having been at the University of Michigan, I was about 30 minutes away from Wayne State University, which that is the mecca for labor archives. So all the different unions and such that you're thinking about, go to Wayne State University. That's where they have the collections. And lo and behold, a couple of thousand miles away from the ground zero of the farm workers movement, Chavez's collections and the UFW collections, a lot of adjacent collections are at Wayne State University. Zach, I spent a couple of days in the archives and just got hooked. I knew this was going to bust wide open. There was a lot more to say about Chavez's religious background, the religiosity of the United Farm Workers, and from that point forward, I knew this was going to be a bigger project. And so I integrated a little bit into my dissertation, and now I am working on a religious biography of Cesar Chavez.
So what we'll get to, some of the actions of the farm workers movement and the sources that students will be looking at. But what I when I engage with labor history, I don't often think about religion. And so what I, see in your work and in kind of your mindset is framing this kind of central component of religion to both Chavez, specifically, but also the farm workers movement more broadly. And I'm curious, like, did you see that whole in your initial research? You're like, oh, this is a story worth telling. What drew you to the religious dimension of this era of history?
Great question. You know, part of it has to do with the fact that in my American Studies program, we have this question about how do we do histories from below or histories from the ground up. Another way of thinking about it is kind of working against the grain. And so, how do we tell a history of the farm workers that centers the farm workers rather than a history of the farm workers in which, let's think historically, right? The archives you would use. So, to do a history of the farm workers, we got to talk about interviewing the farm workers themselves
Mm-hmm.
versus doing a history of, let's say, ag more generally. You're probably looking at institutional records that are produced and preserved, so are produced by some of these big industrial growers. Maybe they have them, at a local society, historical society. Maybe they've donated them to universities for research. And so I became interested in this question of religion. And number one, I mean, I came into that program to study American religion. And I realized that to do the project I wanted, my first book, the dissertation that became a book, half of the dissertation became a book, I needed to talk to folks who were actually doing this kind of work. So this is not really meant to be an advertisement, but I think it is important to actually show the book itself, right?
Sure, yeah.
It's Sowing the Sacred Mexican Pentecostal Farmworkers in California. I conducted about 2 dozen interviews for this with folks who were in the field. And one thing that was very obvious in discussing this and interviewing some of the farm workers who converted to Pentecostalism or were Pentecostal was that faith really mattered to them a great deal.
Mm,
And also, I was hearing stories in how they interacted with Cesar Chavez, or they had known about the farm workers movement. They had joined the farm workers movement. There were some churches that were really engaged in it. I thought there's a lot more to this than what's really been said. And so I became interested in labor and farm work. For one, many of our histories about farm workers, they're farm workers and just that. And that's
yeah,
not a slight against, the wonderful historians who have done that kind of work. There's, sort of a lens, right, that you look at this through. I thought, well, what if we look at some of their historical, let's say their personhood, right? Who they were
yeah,
beyond just farm laborers. And some historians have done great work in seeing how folks turn to unions. Well, this is after the Chavez period, right? But turn to, mutual aid societies to help some of the folks who are really down and out on their luck to feel a sense of camaraderie, a sense of that they're part of something bigger. And for me, I knew religion would be an obvious answer. Number one, we're talking about Mexican farm workers, majority of whom
sure.
are Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
Majority of whom, I mean, the overwhelming majority are religious, whether they're Catholic or Pentecostal or something else. And I thought this is really an obvious place to find it. But Zach, it didn't happen in the way I expected. I went to archives at Berkeley, at UCLA, I think now in the book, 2 lines that I got from multiple days of study there. It was really
Yeah,
interviewing folks by
yeah,
doing a bit of oral history that I got to some of these answers. And the more they told me about their religious lives, the more fascinating that it became. And I just haven't given up that topic quite yet.
yeah. I love that. That's what like this history from the bottom up approach yielded, in the research. And it's very telling that you were only able to really produce a couple lines from the archives. I had a conversation with a historian of women in the American Revolution recently, and she said that the archivist would tell her, "There's nothing on women here. We're so sorry," but they were in these folders just called miscellaneous that they ended up, finding all this and kind of producing this whole era of study. So it's interesting, if you only kind of base your history off what a culture before you or a different culture than you thought worth preserving,
Hmm.
you're getting a very limited history, and you have to ask different questions. Let's dive into this historical moment. The students in this unit are asked to assess the historical significance of the Delano Grape Strike. And so, this is a part of a broader understanding of the farm workers movement and really of civil rights, even more broadly, but through the lens of this historical moment. And so, how would you approach a question like this? What are you thinking about when you read that?
I mean, the impact of the Delano Grape Strike, it's not local history, just it's not just local history. This is national history. And it starts because let's go back to FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal, which again, it brought about really important reforms, but excluded from those reforms and this sort of decade of progress amid the Great Depression were the farm workers who were not
Yeah,
protected by any of the protections of, afforded to workers. So you have a massive pool of laborers that are excluded from the New Deal, the National Labor Relations Act, and they are tossed to and fro, um, you know, hired, fired, and rehired. Anytime someone gets a whiff of some kind of collective action, right, or banding together for higher wages, or God forbid, actually form a union. And so this is going back to again, the mid 1930s. What Chavez proposes to do to form a farm workers union to get growers to agree to these contracts, right? And to actually give farm workers the protections that they have never been afforded to them is seen at the time as impossible and as impractical.
yeah,
It's impossible because number one, how are you going to organize? Again, this takes a lot of work, right? Pre-internet, the sort of ways you might organize today, right?
sure.
How are you going to organize people who 3 to 4 months out from now, maybe we're in Fresno where we start off, and a couple months later they might be in the Imperial Valley, they might be in Salinas. Point is, you probably don't even know where they are.
Yeah, that's so true.
That's really impossible to do, it seemed like. And so the fact that Chavez thought he could do it, right? Number one, it was just advised against because who could possibly pull this off? Number two, it was seen as by many of the unions early on that were going to assist them and support and provide funds and so on as really kind of a waste of time.
Hmm.
I mean, if these are people you can't bank on to even be in the country a year or two out from now, this is not necessarily the most auspicious way, right, of building a union. And so it was also really seen as impractical, for many of the same reasons. But the fact that Chavez pulled this off, right? The fact that, we had the Delano Grape Strike from 65 to 1970. And in this, he got the grape growers through the grape boycott to sign contracts, or that is, for farm workers to finally engage in collective bargaining.
Yeah.
That's something that was long overdue. But for all the reasons that were exacerbated by the very industry of ag, it was just seen as impossible. So its impact is really hard to overstate. And it's it starts in California, right? But it really does have national ramifications.
Yeah, and one thing the students see in this unit is also those international ramifications, right?
Yeah.
That you have dock workers in other countries refusing these boats of grapes, and
Mhm.
uh, you know what leads to a point like this to have I mean, like you brought up the New Deal, and farm workers were pretty overtly excluded from any sort of the wage protections that came out of the New Deal. And we have another 30 years of farm workers, the farm working community growing, agriculture growing, and yet the support for that community, really diminishing and not growing at the same rate as, other forms of unions or, sectors of labor. Um, what is there like a tipping point, a breaking point, that leads to this?
I think it's a point that has arrived to after decades. So to give a couple of historical references and to bring back again, California is really the center of this.
Yeah.
Um, some of the students, again, if you haven't read it, please do yourself a favor, especially if you're in California or the West. You should read it no matter where you are. But The Grapes of Wrath,
Yeah.
by John Steinbeck, it's historical fiction, really. I mean, it's based on the Joad family, right? Those are actually people who it's based on a real family, the places they stop along the way, the labor camp near Arvin, California. That's a place called Weed Patch. That camp is still there, not running
Hmm.
the same way, of course, but widespread discontentment with what California promised. Oh, they would read these get these circulars, right, in the mail and see them in newspapers of come to California, higher wages, bountiful cornucopia, come and work. And when they would arrive, they realized that there's such excess number of people that the wages would plummet almost immediately. They couldn't find jobs. They live in these sort of, broken down lean-to shanties and just
Yeah.
were not as promised. Compound out decade after decade after decade, right? And at that point, um, folks realize that there has to be a better way. And Steinbeck does a great job of documenting that in the 30s. So whether you've watched them, there's movies actually of Mice and Men and The Grapes of Wrath. I think there's also a movie of Indubious Battle. Uh,
Hmm.
book four movie, do it somehow. Get yourself into that, and you'll find the persistent theme of widespread discontent.
Yeah.
And I would also add that Steinbeck's work portrays um, Dust Bowl or Okie workers, as they're called.
Hmm.
And in Dubious Battle, for example, that's actually based on a real strike in the California Central Valley. The real historical example is based on Mexican workers. But to get national attention, uh, Steinbeck turned it largely into a story about white workers.
Wow.
That does something to national conscience, right? If you want to grab nation's attention, say, look how these folks, these you know, hardy, salt to the earth type of folks from Oklahoma, from Texas, look how they're being treated. They're one of us. And it's the same rhetorical tool used by many writers at the time. So in
Hmm.
the 30s, when the Dust Bowl workers are arriving in California in large numbers, a lot of, I mean, many of them are excluded, right? The term Okie itself is used as a point to denigrate these folks from Oklahoma. And Mexican workers are there all along. They outnumber them before, during, and long after. And it's finally Chavez gets the nation's attention through the boycott. And if I can just again add one more thing, right, to this,
Yeah.
why this matters, the impact. This forces the nation and also many of the powerful growers to reckon with farm workers, right? This group that was thought of as peons. They can be
Right.
at any moment. They can't unionize against us, so we can treat them as we would. There wasn't regular access to toilets, to sanitary units, um, to food. The labor camps again. This is portrayed so well in some of the literature and historical fiction as well. Living in historical, or sorry, living in the camp housing where you buy food that's overpriced from the camp store and you have to use your meager wages to buy it. Folks just got tired of it eventually, and Chavez is the one who had the know-how from a couple of years before that. I mean, for a decade at that point, he had already been working with the community service organization, and he had built quite a bit of know-how on how to formally organize farm workers. But it was still an ambitious project that folks thought he would ultimately lose, and he didn't. And he proved much of the country wrong.
Yeah, I mean, just to think about the scale of both impact in the moment of this, 5 year or almost 5 year strike, and then the results of it, it really is astounding. And we think of organizing, and you said this earlier in like the world of smartphones and social media, but to organize pre, global connectivity and among, the farm working community, which wouldn't have even had access to many of these things is really quite an incredible feat.
Hmm.
I'm curious when you've engaged in this historical moment, are there particular sources that have really stood out to you? Perspectives, other primary sources that feel indicative of the era, or can shed better light on the era.
Oh, absolutely. And, another sort of impact of this and what shaped kind of my reading and one of the things I'm gonna recommend is how the grape strike fundamentally alters how we view the intersection of religion and labor, especially
Hmm.
strikes. Um, so Chavez and the farm workers engage in nonviolence, but also inject into that um, what we call Catholic social teaching, ideas on how people should treat each other on earth and what is the way of doing that in a Christian manner.
Yeah.
So one of the historical documents I turned to, and I'm happy to share the link that you can provide to anyone interested in this.
Thank you.
Yep, is so it's a primary source, right? Produced right before the farm workers go on what people call a strike, and I've written about this before. It's not a strike, it's a pilgrimage in 1966 during the Easter or the Lenten season rather. In 1966, they marched from Delano, 250 plus miles up to Sacramento, and this document that's produced is called the Plan of Delano, and this takes from, you know, Mexican history, right, where you have different plans to sort of um, instruct on how to move forward or what your vision is for the future. So this is called the Plan of Delano or Plan de Delano. And again, I'm going to provide the link that you can take a look at. But it's Chavez, along with one of the really, geniuses of organizing, especially music and setting up what's called the Teatro Campesino or the farm workers theater, Luis
Hmm.
Valdez. They put together this maybe 5 or 6 page so document, and they spell out why they're going on this pilgrimage. Why? Again, it's supposed to be a labor strike, right? Develops into a boycott. What does a pilgrimage have to do with that?
Yeah.
And this, I think, helps me get into a mode of historical thinking that really has lit the fire under me to do this project that I'm doing now. Uh, they talk about Mexican history. They talk about Catholic social teaching. They quote from, popes from the late 1800s about what we call, this idea of the rerum novarum of workers shouldn't be exploited.
Yeah.
So think about that for a moment, right? They're quoting from the Pope in this document on how workers should be treated. Now, who's that going to resonate with? The majority of Mexican and Filipino farm workers? Certainly. But how about the growers themselves, who majority of them are Catholic, whether they're Polish or they're Italian, the majority of them are Catholic.
Yeah.
So again, let's get this straight from the Pope's mouth, right? Um, and insert this into our plan for moving forward. And also in it, Chavez lays out a very clear vision of what he means by the church. He says the church is the great body of believers, not just a Catholic church, capital C, but he actually uses the term Catholic to mean universal.
Hmm.
Um, and this is an issue that concerns human dignity, which human dignity is very central in Catholic social teaching. Like again, let's just strip it down real quick. You shouldn't mistreat someone because of the value of human dignity that God endows upon individuals. That's just super basic, right?
Yeah.
And it comes out so richly in this plan of Delano. And again, why engage in a pilgrimage? And this it's later quoted, um, we do this to purify ourselves because how can we strike and go forward unless our hearts are right in pursuing this? It's a very bold endeavor, and I'm happy to comment more.
Yeah.
But that's the document. I use it regularly when I teach my courses. Again, I'm in the religion department, right? So I teach my American religion course. When we get to some work on Latino history, or if I'm divvying up differently, getting to the 1960s and 70s, basically this post-World War II period, I go to the Planet Delano. It's very clear on, American public life and religion, labor, why it all matters. It brings it together perfectly.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love for you to expand a little bit on like the importance of calling this a pilgrimage, and because I think much of scholarship calls it a strike.
Mhm.
It's a part of labor history. It's involving some sort of protest within labor, so this is a convenient term.
Mhm.
Yeah, I remember the first time I heard you make this distinction at a conference, and it was like this is a pilgrimage, and it really kind of opened my eyes to the layers that and the foundations of this historical moment. So can you speak a little bit more to that?
Sure. And I'm reminded, I'm going to send another document, link another document to you. So there's the University of California at San Diego has a farm workers movement documentary project. And there they have linked, again, folks checking this out, please do yourself a favor. If you're interested in the United Farm Workers and Chavez, this collection is just replete with great materials. They have the periodical that the United Farm Workers published in the 60s called El Malcriado, the like sort of the ill-born, the ill-bred one, which means sort of like the rascal, the one who sort of poked the side right of the bear. They have an issue of El Malcriado that it's also the subtitles. It's La Voz del Campesino, the voice of the farm worker, and in it they have maps, they have photographs of this whole thing. Now, what's important here is it's referred to as a pilgrimage, peregrinación. Pilgrimages are well known in Latin American Catholicism,
Yeah.
so that language would have totally resonated with folks. And if you look at some of the images of this pilgrimage, at the front is the United Farm Workers flag, the red and black flag, and there's also the a banner of Our Lady of Guadalupe,
Mm.
the most ubiquitous Catholic image, right, in the Americas, I would say. And a banner of hers up at the front. It's so hard again. I'm not trying to force a historical argument here. They're calling it a pilgrimage.
Yeah.
The three words used are pilgrimage, revolution, and penance. So also
Wow.
penance, right? That sort of language is going to resonate with the Catholics who are both farm workers and the Catholics who are growers. And so I'll give you a link not just to the Farm Workers Movement documentary project, but I'll also link this specific issue that I have in mind. It's one of the mid-April issues.
Yeah, thank you. And maybe this you already answered here, or you'll want to expand on, but given so the unit has students. I mean, they look at a couple excerpts from El Malcriado, and they touch on some things from the kind of the Filipino perspective within the collaborative atmosphere, but also potential for tension within the Mexican and farm workers and Filipino. But anyway, I'm curious, are there perspectives that students maybe don't get to engage with in this unit that are worth calling attention to for deeper exploration?
Yeah, for one, I think the unit's excellent. So whatever I add is really just, for kind of a further deep dive, if you will.
Yeah.
So one convenient way of engaging in other perspectives is it it's sort of a primary source still, but it's one
Hmm.
that's very accessible. You can probably get it through most libraries very easily. The 1975, so it's not technically a biography or an autobiography of Chavez. So this is called it's called Cesar Chavez, um, Autobiography of La Causa by Jacques Levy.
Hmm.
This is an original 1975 copy here. This is wonderful. Also, actually, by the way, as I was opening this up, this is an image of the pilgrimage. So you see the Mexican flag,
Yeah.
the American flag, the standard or the banner rather of Our Lady of Guadalupe. It's all there.
Yeah.
Here, Jacques Levy, who rode around with Chavez with his little tape recorder, right? I've listened to some of the original audio files, and some are pretty hard to get through just because you get background noise as they're driving in these 1970 clunker vehicles. Um, and probably usually hot when they're driving. Um, this is great because you get a lot of firsthand account from Chavez, but you also hear from Dolores Huerta, for example. You
Yeah.
hear from Chavez's attorney, Jerry Cohen. You hear from some of the organizers, and Cohen very clearly states when who's speaking, and this is supposed to walk you through from Chavez's early years up until the early 1970s. And
Okay.
this, again, books published in 75,
Yeah.
which bookends, I think, the importance of this Delano Grape Strike. In 75, you have the California Labor Relations Act, which that one changes the game, right? It makes everything that the farm workers were fighting for, uh, it makes it law in California, rather than ad hoc, union organizing one place or another, or contracts here, contracts there. It makes it standard law. And so, there's complications obviously with that later in how long it lasts, how it's administered, who's administering it, but
Hmm.
it really does change the game. And so, yeah, one source I would point students towards to get different perspectives is the Autobiography of La Causa, because you will have, two, sometimes three to four people talking about the same thing, a moment, when Chavez engaged in a fast, not a hunger strike, all right, a fast in
Yeah.
1960. They'll talk about what they saw, how they understood it, and it's great to get multiple perspectives on this.
Yeah, I mean, I love the subtitle alone that it embraces the cause as it
Mhm.
personifies the cause, right? It's the
Oh
autobiography
yeah.
of the cause, not a particular individual. Uh, yeah, so you're in the school of religion with your kind of focus on religion and your training in American studies, and I appreciate this dynamic greatly because I think so often we can get caught up in terms that we would use to describe protests in our current moment. But like a great example like this, it wasn't a hunger fast. This was a strike. This
Mhm.
wasn't a strike, but a pilgrimage, and like these, what they do is they add layers, I think, to the complexity and the humanity of those involved, which I think is really important. As we exhibit historical empathy and understanding that, the study of the past is of people in places that aren't like our own, and we have to embrace that in this field and in your own teaching of it and research of it. What do you hope students or readers get out of it? We talked about kind of what drew you to this moment of study or to this era of study, but what do you hope people draw out of it?
That's a great question. Really throws me into sort of a reflective and introspective kind of mode. I mean, for one is I don't think we see it as overtly unless you're looking in particular places to see that so much organizing for social causes employ religious rhetoric
Mm,
and figures. So I actually had a chance to chat with Jerry Cohen, who's Chavez's alum. I conducted an oral history with him about a month ago in Northern California near Salinas. And one thing that was so fascinating is he helped me understand why when the growers, when they wanted to sit down and have a conversation with Chavez and Jerry Cohen himself, right, who was at the negotiation table,
yeah.
they would use to mediate those conversations Archbishop Roger Mahoney,
Mm,
different rabbis, again, depending on what part of the state you're at,
yeah.
different religious figures. Why? Because they're trusted. So there was an assumed trust, I think, was much more acute in the 1960s, around
Sure.
70s. But I think one of the important takeaways is that when it comes to these various social justice issues, even immigrant rights, which I study now along with the farm workers movement, um, it's clergy who are often leading these efforts. And
Hmm.
again, not just clergy, but laity, that folks really do some of this work of social justice and such because they have a deep religious concern, whether it's the Catholic social teaching that we talked about, or for many of the Jewish organizers, this idea of tikkun olam, or like repairing the world. These are deep-seated religious convictions, and so for them, again, it's important to organize for the sake of the laborers themselves, but also they feel that they're divinely inspired to do this, and I think that matters in how we understand even the current moment that we're in now, where folks protests are quite common, and understanding why the religious rhetoric is there, I think will
Hmm.
understand the diversity of the humanity that we live among, right? Especially in a place like Southern California. Goodness, you would see a lot of it there for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I can tell you already. I wish the conversation could be never ending and continue at a coffee shop. And I know my mind is spinning about these deeper connections within the Delano Grape Strike, yes, and also the broader farm workers movement. But another time,
Right.
perhaps. But Dr. Lloyd Barba of Amherst College, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation as we think historically about this historical moment.
Thanks so much for facilitating this. This is great. I'm always happy to talk about this.
Thanks.